It's time to talk NFL, Denver, Broncos, football on the Arledge Football Network here on the Prime Sports Network YouTube channel. And we are getting, of course, not only closer to the Super Bowl, but for fan bases of teams that failed to make the postseason, like the Denver Broncos, we couldn't be getting any faster towards the offseason free agency and the NFL draft. And that's why we want to continue these interviews with some of the top insiders in the business. We last spoke to him when he was covering the Minnesota Vikings. We now get an opportunity to speak with him as he covers the Denver Broncos for the Denver Gazette. Chris Tomasson. Chris, thanks for doing this again.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
All right, so you've gone from Minnesota to Denver. How's that switch? How's that doing? You must be loving life in Denver. That's a beautiful part of the country.
Yeah, not bad at all. It's a delightful near 60-degree day out here, but kind of similar teams that I covered. Both the of course, the Broncos didn't lose their starting quarterback due to injury. He was benched in Russell Wilson, but Kirk Cousins getting hurt in Minnesota. Both teams started out poorly, had a run, and finished poorly. So kind of similar seasons between the Broncos and the Vikings this year.
All right, so very crazy season for Denver. They start off really slow, they make a big run, and then it just kind of all fell apart in the whole Russell Wilson deal. So I know this is about the offseason, and I'm not going to ask you to get into the whole intricacies of Sean Payton and Russell Wilson, but just the bottom line, and that is what do you predict is going to happen to the quarterback position for the Denver Broncos in 2024?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty well understood that Russell Wilson will be released by March 17th. That's when a $37 million salary kicks in for 2025 for a 37-year-old at the time quarterback. So, unless there's some kind of Hail Mary and he wakes up one morning with a revelation that, oh, I need to do something and work with them with my contract to stay in Denver, he's going to be gone. And then it's kind of wide open what's going to happen after that. I mean, Jarrett Stidham had essentially like a tryout for the last two games when they benched Russell Wilson, but really they didn't get a tremendous amount out of that. I mean, he wasn't great, he wasn't bad. He was about what you would expect out of Jarrett Stidham. So he's kind of the fallback option, I would think, to be the starter at this point. They have the number 12 pick in the draft. It would take a tremendous amount of capital and Pat Surtain to trade up to get one of the top three quarterbacks. I don't know if that's going to happen. Maybe they trade down, draft a Bo Nix or a Michael Penix or a J.J. McCarthy. Might be a reach to take one of those guys at number 12. So, but who knows if they get a rookie quarterback who's able to start right away. So Stidham then potentially could be the bridge quarterback unless they find another low-priced veteran that they can bring in to be a bridge quarterback if they decide that they're going to go the draft route for a quarterback. But they don't have the money to go out and get really a big-name
Sure.
quarterback.
I mean, from the outside perspective, I'm saying to myself, well, here's Sean Payton. He did wonders for a early second round draft pick in Drew Brees. And why can't he, like you said, why can't he trade down in the draft, take one of those guys? You know, he's it's just like many coaches, especially ones that have won Super Bowls. They have egos. I can do this. I can take this guy. Wasn't like Patrick Mahomes was a top 10 pick either. So you know what? Again, from my perspective, I'm thinking, well, that does seem like the likely alternative because I can't imagine that they're not going to use that first pick or at least an early pick on a quarterback.
Yeah, they're in a bit of a tricky spot because the top three quarterbacks are going to be long gone by the time they get around to number 12. And then the next tier of three that I mentioned might be a reach to take them at number 12.
Yep.
I mean, one of those guys might be around in might still be around in the second round, but they don't have a second round pick. They don't pick until the third round. So
Okay.
if they take somebody else at number 12 and think they're going to get a quarterback in the third round, I mean, the pickings could be slim at that point. So, I mean, obviously we've got several months of seeing these quarterbacks go through various all-star games, the combine, pro days, private workouts. So some of these guys are going to rise, some
Yep.
potentially fall. So we'll know more. But, at this point, I'm thinking the most prudent thing might be to trade down from 12, get
Yep.
some additional assets since they don't have a second round pick, and then potentially grab one of the three guys in that next tier
Yep.
at quarterback.
I agree. What I'm going to do is post up on the screen so the viewers can see. I'm going to be using over the cap as far as the updated free agent list for the Broncos, and then obviously for the depth chart, the rlads.com Denver Broncos depth chart, and we'll have a link in the description for the Denver Broncos depth charts, and then here you go: offense, defense, special teams, and reserves. So what I'm going to do first, though, Chris, is talk about those free agents. So before I get into the unrestricted free agents, the top ones, of course, are there any potential cap casualties?
Yeah, there definitely will be some cap casualties. I mean, they're roughly around 30 million, or excuse me, around 23 million or so over the cap now. And if they release Russell Wilson, that's an $85 million hit. I don't think they would take it in 1 year. They'd divide it up into 2 years. And so they got some work to do. And they got a number of high priced veterans who have non guaranteed money for this coming season. So there's some clout. They can come to these guys if they want to keep any and say, hey, you got to renegotiate or we'll cut you. And we'll see whose bluff, might get called. But some of those guys, obviously, Tim Patrick was on the injured list all season. He's certainly not going to come back at his inflated, he's making about $9.5 million non-guaranteed for next year. He certainly won't be back at that number. Cortland Sutton has a big number. Garrett Bowles, a big number. DJ Jones has a big number. So there's several guys in that group who have big contracts that if they want to keep them, they'll have to renegotiate their deal. But if not, they could just be outright cut. And that's something's got to happen because they obviously will have to get them to the cap by the start of the new league year on March 13th.
Yeah, you mentioned so Patrick, Bowles, DJ Jones. Obviously, we know Russell Wilson. What was the other? It was the
Cortland Sutton.
Cortland Sutton, yes, the
Right.
wide receiver. Okay, and so you can now out of those players, which one do you think? Maybe all of them, but which ones do you think would be more likely to restructure and stay with the team?
Well, maybe a Garrett Bowles. He's got to do 16 million non-guaranteed, and I mean that's a tricky situation because there's no logical replacement at left tackle, and
Okay.
if they were just to let him go and bring in a good left tackle, that's going to cost a lot of money, or perhaps even more. And he's he's over 30, so he might be able to work with them, and they get some kind of renegotiated type deal and get his cap number down for the upcoming season. Cortland Sutton's situation is tricky because he's coming off a very good season, but he's due to make a non-guaranteed $13 million. I don't think he's a $13 million receiver, and it's always tough to take a pay cut when you stay with your existing team. So I'm sure his agent is kind of gauging what his market value is if they come to Sutton and say, hey, we'd like to keep you, but we can't pay you $13 million. DJ Jones might be the type of guy who's just outright released. I mean, he's solid, but not a star, and he's got a big number.
Okay. Then let's move on over to those key unrestricted free agents. We'll start on offense because Bowles is one of the tackles, obviously the main starter. Fleming is a veteran at about 32 years old, so he's a free agent right now. And matter of fact, Fleming's and again he's a backup, but the other free agent and the most important one besides Bowles, actually the only one right now, is Cushenberry.
Well, Bowles isn't a free agent; he's under contract.
Yep.
So, Cushenberry that's a tricky situation because he had a very good season, and if he can command a deal of 10 million plus at center, that just might be too rich for the Broncos to absorb. But really, he's only had one good season. His first three seasons were okay. So, does a team want to gamble with just one season under his belt of being very good, or is he not going to get that huge deal? So that's kind of if it's he's the type of guy that if it's close, maybe he'll take a hometown discount. But if the numbers are far apart, then he would be history. Josie Jewell, also a free agent, and he's a guy, similar position. He might be willing to take a slight hometown discount to stay in Denver, where he has been his whole career. He likes it out here, but probably less likely that someone's going to throw huge money at him versus Cushenberry, who's younger. So I think there's a decent chance that Jewell, they can probably reach some sort of agreement that he returns. And then you touched upon Fleming. I mean, he's a low-priced type of guy. He wants to come back to Denver, so a couple million a year, I could see that happening. And if they decide to part with Bowles, I mean, I guess Fleming could be a stopgap 1 year type guy at left tackle for him.
Kawan Williams, he was out all last year.
Yeah, he pretty much will move on. He's a free agent. He had ankle surgery. He had it right before the start of the season. It was initially arthroscopic. They thought he might return around midseason, but it didn't take hold, and then he had to have a more extensive surgery. I talked to him a bit after the season. He was the primary nickelback, but Jaquan McMillan has moved into that role, so
Okay.
I'm sure Kawan Williams will be going elsewhere.
All right, so those are the key free agents to keep an eye on. And I think we've covered. And Troutman just never worked out, huh? He just never. I know they tried to
Oh no,
bring.
he was solid.
He was.
Yeah, Sean Payton likes him a lot. I mean, I don't know if he's a starting type caliber tight end. I mean, Greg Dulcich was supposed to be that guy, but he's been the guy who's had all kinds of injury problems, and I don't know if you can fully count on him to remain healthy. So if a deal can be reached on Troutman, who played for Sean Payton in New Orleans, and they like him a lot, I would imagine there's a good chance he comes back.
All right, and I think we've covered all of the key guys as far as free agents, and the only other one is just a veteran, Mike Purcell, but that's nothing. He's just he'll be a cheap alternative anyway. He's not going to command much on the market anyhow. Correct?
Well, he's from Denver and he wants to finish his career here
Okay.
in Denver. So I think you could get him for a low dollar value. And if DJ Jones isn't returning, that's one loss on the defensive line. Also, Jonathan Harris is a restricted free agent. He was a starter last year. I don't think he's going to command huge dollars, so he's probably a guy they'll be able to bring back. But yeah, if Purcell is willing to come back for a low dollar amount, being a hometown guy, I could see that happening.
And also Fabian Moreau. Uh, how's Fabian Moreau fit in potentially with their plans?
I mean, he was picked up at the start of training camp and ended up being a starter, and certainly, was an average starter. Was a veteran. I mean, for cornerback depth, I could see him coming back for a low dollar amount somewhere, around the minimum or slightly above. And he's a fallback option to start again at cornerback. But I would imagine they're going to try to pick up a potential starting cornerback in the draft.
Okay, yeah, let's start. So, yeah, let's talk about. We'll start with the secondary there. So, again, you got Williams will be gone. Moreau, as you mentioned. So, we'll see what happens there. As far as the rest of the unit, talk about, because you mentioned McMillan. So, talk about some of those guys like McMillan, the 2022 draft pick, Mathis, as he developed, Raleigh Moss, as he developed. You got Turner Yell. So, you do have several higher to mid-round draft picks in that secondary. Are any of those guys going to be part of the future, or are they in serious mode where they're going to need not just one but maybe two additional DBs?
Well, one free agent you didn't bring up is PJ Locke.
Yes.
He moved in as the starter after Kareem Jackson had all of his suspensions, and he did a solid job, and I'm sure they'd like to bring him back.
Okay.
But if the dollars don't match, they've kind of got in the stable as well. Caden Stearns, he was listed as number one on the depth chart along with Jackson to start the season. And then right at the start of the second quarter in the opener, he suffers a season-ending knee injury. So they'll evaluate his health, and if they think that Stearns can be a guy who can be a regular starter alongside Pro Bowler Justin Simmons, then they're not going to throw any kind of big dollars at PJ Locke. So that's the safety situation. Moving over cornerback, we already addressed that they need another cornerback to pair with Pat Surtain, who, of course, is a Pro Bowler as well and was an All Pro in 2022. Mathis, you mentioned, was in his second year in 2023. He started the season as a starter, but to be honest, he was really bad. He was one of the lowest rated cornerbacks in the entire league. I mean, I'm not going to say they've given up on him, but to think that he's going to come back and be a starter at this juncture, I don't think so.
I was a fan of J.L. Skinner's. I know his size. He's one of those players that you just don't know if he could fit into the right system. He didn't play at all last year. Was it an injury? And what are they looking at there as far as the future? Do they believe he could be part of the depth with that defensive backfield?
Well, it was basically like a redshirt year for Skinner. I talked to him right at the start of the season. He tore his pec muscle right around a year ago, last February, right before the combine, and so he didn't participate in any of the combine or workout type situations. So fell to the 6th round, didn't participate in spring drills, came back for training camp, but he told me right at the start of the season that he was still only about 90%. So he was behind from the get-go, both in learning the system and also with his health. And, basically it was just a redshirt type season. They had Jackson suspended at safety. They had a number of injuries at safety, but they never even considered, or they never, he was hardly active. I think he was active for like 2 games the entire season, was never given any realistic chance. I mean, we're not privy to watching practices during the regular season. So, maybe he didn't show the type of development during regular season practices that they had hoped for. But, basically he was behind from the get-go with his injury situation.
Riley Moss, that was a 3rd-round draft pick. So same thing from last year's draft class. Is that just same deal? Just a red shirt kind of deal, and he's still potentially part of their plans in the future?
Yeah, they like him. He missed 4 weeks of training camp, all of the preseason with a core muscle injury, and that kind of set him behind. And they didn't really end up needing him. I mean, most of the injuries and the suspensions, etc., were at safety, but at cornerback, I mean, they were fully healthy throughout the entire season. Surtain played in every game, didn't have any serious injury issues, and then Mathis ended up being benched, and Moreau came in. He was healthy, and when there were a few plays here and there that they needed a reserve to come in a cornerback, it still was Mathis. Mathis remained ahead of Moss on the depth chart. So yeah, he was behind a little bit with the injury and just kind of a redshirt season for Moss, and takes time to learn the NFL system, obviously, but they like him moving forward.
Matter of fact, just thinking about, once again, as you mentioned, no 2nd-round draft pick, it even makes more sense why they would want to trade down, accumulate some more draft capital, because this is part of the reason there. And we're going to get into obviously some of the other positions, but just taking a look at the secondary, and we're going to know a lot more once free agency is gone as we go into the draft. But what's going to determine, do they bring Moreau back? What about Locke? And if they do bring Moreau and Locke back, well, yes, still need another defense, still need another corner in the secondary. But it makes it a lot easier knowing you can go into the draft and only maybe need 1 corner, and you can always draft another guy, even though they seem to have a lot of other young players that, again, like a Moss or a Skinner, that may be able to pick up the slack. So a lot's going to determine whether or not they resign, especially Moreau. And that would pretty much be the case, correct? Is that if they do resign Moreau and Locke, then you would only look at maybe one top, player that they need to slot into the defensive backfield, and most likely, of course, that being cornerback?
Well, they probably, even if they bring back Moreau with the uncertainty of the development of Mathis, I mean, they would probably like to get a long-term type guy that they like at cornerback. But you know as well as I do, quarterbacks and cornerbacks go early in the draft. I mean, there's been some speculation they might take a cornerback at number 12, but if they don't make any moves, then you're not picking till the third round if you want a
Quarterback.
quarterback. So
Yeah.
yeah. So maybe you trade down and you get an additional pick, and then you can take a quarterback and a cornerback, with your first two picks in whatever order, because those guys go fast in the draft, as you well know.
Yep. By the way, before we move on, McMillan. So you think he is, no matter what, he'll probably just slide in? Do they like him enough to slide in as the starting nickel back in 24?
Yeah,
Okay.
most definitely. He's the guy. They love the job that he did. Even got a vote for the All Pro team and that sort of thing. So yeah, he's pretty much their nickel back of the future.
All right, now let's go to linebacker. We talked about Jewell, so he's a free agent. They have a couple other free agents as well, but let's start in the middle. Of course, you have Singleton there and Jewell. So, what are you looking at there? Singleton, he's a solid player. So, is it just a matter of if they resign Jewell or not? Let's say they don't, even though you would guess that they'd probably be able to afford him. But if they don't, does that become a pretty important spot that they need to fill, or do you think Drew Sanders can pick up the slack?
Well, yeah, they don't have a logical replacement for Jewell. I think they have to, if Jewell departs, I think they have to determine Drew Sanders. I mean, is he an inside linebacker in his future? Is he an outside linebacker
Yeah.
in his future? If they deem he's an inside linebacker, then yeah, he would certainly be a possible replacement for Jewell. And but one thing, Singleton and Jewell, they're best buddies, best friends. Singleton's going to bat trying to get him to re-sign Jewell. They work well together. They just mesh well together. So that has to be a consideration, that if Jewell doesn't come back, they're going to lose that potential chemistry.
Okay, and on the outside, and of course, this is where they put all their pressure as far as the edge rushers. Talk about this. Anytime you're going to run some variation of a 3-4, or if that is your base, you need edge rushers on the outside at this spot, and it doesn't look like the Broncos have a whole lot. So, what was good for them last year as far as their edge rushers was concerned?
Actually, I think that's one of their strengths. I
Okay.
mean, they have a core of three young outside linebackers who they're committed to, and they're all under rookie contracts, so they don't have to worry yet about potentially paying them a whole bunch of money. I mean, you got Jonathan Cooper, you got Nick Benito, and you got Baron Browning, and if those guys can remain healthy, they love that rotating threesome moving forward. I mean, they had some veterans, but Randy Gregory got traded after 4 games to San Francisco. He's playing in the Super Bowl now. Frank Clark got released, a couple weeks later. He went to Seattle, and he's out of the NFL now. Who knows if he'll even be back? So, yeah, they moved on from those veterans, partly because they're very intrigued with those three young outside linebackers and wanted them to be on the field.
Excellent. Okay. Let's now move into the defensive line. We mentioned, of course, maybe DJ Jones is a cap casualty. You mentioned Harris as a free agent. Purcell, of course, a free agent. Zach Allen is the only mainstay. So this does look like an area where they're going to have to do some work.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the defensive line needs work. I mean, Zach Allen started a little slow, came on, but maybe was a little bit dipped a little at the end of the year, but so did everybody just about. They lost 4 of the last 6 games. But he's a definite future piece they like. Other than that, I mean, it's fill in the pieces. I mean, DJ Jones, we'll have to see if he's back. Jonathan Harris is a restricted free agent, and I think he can come back at a reasonable dollar amount. I don't think anybody's going to give him a huge offer. And Mike Purcell, wants to come back, so I think that they can get something done with him. But yeah, they need some help there. They don't have a lot of cap room. They brought in a guy, Richard Lawrence, who has some pro experience on a futures deal last week. So, they may have to just find some bodies and go cheap to fill out the roster at defensive line, because they don't have a lot of money to throw at somebody like they did last year when they gave Zach Allen a big contract.
The good thing is when you have those issues on a 3-4 defensive line, and also at center, which they might. You can find centers in the draft sometimes mid to late rounds. You could also find defensive linemen mid to late rounds. So there are positions that you obviously got to scout well. Matter of fact, one of those players they drafted a couple of years ago, and I remember that was a very big. People were wondering where this pick come from. Was the kid Henningsen, and that sure hasn't worked out so far. I mean, I'm still not sure why they made that pick. Was that like a developmental guy that they just thought was going to fit in with this team, and maybe they still like him? I have no idea.
Well, I probably should have mentioned him when I gave the rundown. Yeah, he's certainly decent. A lot of people projected that he was going to be a starter this past season, and then Jonathan Harris, who had been mostly on practice squads in his career, kind of beat him out, which was a bit of a surprise. But yeah, he was a capable reserve next season, and he's a guy who certainly could step in, and I'm sure they're hoping that he can take another step.
Okay. Switch over to offense. We talked about the quarterback position and the running back position. Meanwhile, Javonte Williams will be another year removed from the injury. So, were they satisfied with their running game last year?
No, I wouldn't say that they were. It looked like it was coming on around midseason. They rolled up 169 yards in a victory over Cleveland, but then the running attack kind of fizzled, to be honest, the last part of the season. And a key reason they lost 4 of their last 6 games was they couldn't get the running game going like they had at times earlier in the season. I mean, Javonte Williams, I think he was worn out by the end of the season. I mean, he had a stretch of games, the entire second half of the season, he never averaged 4 yards a carry, and he had a stretch of about 3 games where he didn't even average 3 yards a carry. Coming back from the ACL injury, I don't know if he denied it, but I think he kind of wore down
Sure.
at the end of the season. Jaleel McLaughlin was definitely a big surprise as an undrafted free agent. He certainly had his moments, but I don't know if he can be a regular guy in the backfield versus a change of pace guy, because pass protection is an issue for him. And a lot of people were wondering when he slumped at times that it was kind of telegraphed. Well, obviously he's in the game, so he's going to get the ball because he's not a pass blocker type of guy. And the original plan at the start of the season before McLaughlin emerged was Williams and Samaje Perine, a free agent signing. They were going to be kind of like a 1-2 combo. And it kind of was a mystery with Perine. I mean, he showed a lot of good flashes at times, running the ball, catching the ball, but he just didn't get a lot of snaps. And it was kind of bewildering at times when the running game wasn't going well, when Javonte Williams was struggling, as to why Perine wasn't given more carries or at least more chances.
Do you then see that this trio will be back next season?
Yeah, I would think so at this point. I mean, Javonte Williams is entering the 4th year of his rookie contract. I don't think he's in any kind of position where he's going to get a lucrative extension. Perine's entering the 2nd year of a 2-year deal, and obviously McLaughlin is on his rookie deal. And as well as I do with running backs, I mean, you can find them late in the draft. You can find them free agents. So I'm sure they'll try to pick up a couple of backs here and there, but I don't see him using a high draft pick on one.
No. All right. Let's talk about, we mentioned Troutman at tight end, and then, of course, Dulcich. With Dulcich, it's just a matter of making sure that he gets healthy, right? So they're pretty much, maybe they re-signed Troutman. He shouldn't cost much. And are we looking at the same group of players at tight end?
Yeah, I think so. Chris Manhertz, he's a blocker. He's coming back on the second year of his deal. He's another former Peyton player from New Orleans. So if you played for Sean Payton in New Orleans, he likes you even more. So that helps your chances. And you mentioned, Greg Dulcich. I mean, he played in only 2 games this past year. He said after the season that his hamstring had healed and that was fine, but then he got a foot injury which set him back, because if he didn't have that, the hope was to activate him for the final couple games of the season. But I mean, it's kind of always been something with him. He's now missed 22 games in his first 2 seasons, so he has to prove that he can stay healthy. So, and then they got another guy, Nate Atkins, who was an undrafted free agent, who, mainly as a blocker, they kind of like him. So it's kind of the same situation, I would think, at tight end as it is with running back. I mean, you're not going to use a high draft pick, but certainly if you like a guy late in the draft or a cheap free agent, you might bring in an extra guy to compete.
All right, a wide receiver. On paper, it looked like a very interesting and talented group, but that's paper. And then throw in injuries and inconsistency and so forth. Starting with Jerry Jeudy. What's the deal with Jeudy? He just, again, I'm not a Denver fan. I don't follow them all the time, but sometimes you hear he's going to be the guy. He's ready for a breakout year, and then it just never seems to happen.
Yeah, it was kind of a mystery this past season. The Broncos last May picked up his fifth-year option of about $12.9 million, and even then they took it to the deadline and him and hawed a little bit, because that's a fully guaranteed amount of money. But Jeudy did finish the 2022 season strong, and it looked like he was ascending. But last year he just never really got going. I mean, he was expected to be the Broncos' number one receiver, but Cortland Sutton was the guy who developed into that, and he never really became the deep threat that you had hoped for. I mean, it's kind of a mystery. You could say, well, maybe he and Russell Wilson weren't on the same page, but he closed 2022 playing well with Wilson, and they were on the same page then. And, I think he got a little down and lost some confidence during the season when he wasn't catching balls and that sort of thing. But, it's been rumored he's on the trade market, but nobody's, I don't think, is going to take that 12.9 fully guaranteed salary for next year. So I fully expect he'll be back and he'll have a chance to sort things out.
And getting back to Sutton and Patrick. So you think Patrick is, both of them, you think they'll be restructured? And do you think one or both of them will return?
Well, Patrick missed the entire season with an Achilles injury. So, I mean, they'll have to evaluate how he's doing health-wise. But obviously missing the whole season and that sort of thing, I mean, the only way he's coming back is for a low-level salary. And is he going to agree to that? I mean, who knows? Maybe he's not going to get a good offer from anybody, but maybe he'll just want a change of scenery. It's always tough when you have a big salary cut to stay in your same team.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's a definite question mark. Sutton is tricky because he's on the books for a non-guaranteed $13 million, and he had a good season and made a lot of spectacular catches. But he's now entering his 7th season or so. He's a veteran. I mean, he's not a $13 million receiver. You can't bring him back at that number. So he might be a guy that they try to negotiate some sort of new contract with, keep him around for a couple of years. But, I mean, he and his agent will find out his market value. And if they come to them wanting to restructure and he thinks he can get a better deal elsewhere, then they'll release him and he'll move on. But I can't see him coming back for that salary cap number.
How did Mims do as a rookie? He seemed to be a typical rookie, up and down.
Well, he was kind of a mystery too in the Samaje Perine vein. I mean, he started out great, not only returning the ball, but as a receiver, had several long electrifying catches. And then weeks on end went by when he wasn't even targeted, and every week it was kind of the same thing. Peyton would say, "Oh yeah, we're going to make a concerted effort to get Mims the ball," and it never really seemed to happen for whatever reason. I mean, the passing game, a lot of it was a mystery. We touched upon Judy, and he couldn't get going, and then Mims, didn't live up toward the end of the season to the way he started it, but he wasn't getting the targets. But I think overall, knowing what they have, I think they like him, and they'll certainly make a big effort to incorporate him into the offense next season. Because if Sutton's gone, Patrick's
Oh yeah.
gone, he's their number two receiver at this juncture behind Judy.
What did you think from what you saw? What kind of future do you think he could have?
Yeah, he's got good speed and he's elusive. I think if used correctly, I mean, maybe he's got to put on a little bit more muscle to battle opposing defensive backs and that sort of thing. But I think he's certainly, definitely has potential, and certainly he's a Pro Bowl kick returner. I mean, he started out the season kick and punt returner. They started kicking away from him, so he didn't get many opportunities toward the end of the season. But he's definitely. It's a team that doesn't have a lot of speed and a lot of electrifying playmakers, and he's one of the few guys that could potentially fit into that category.
Okay, and then by the way, Humphrey's a free agent, and he got a lot of snaps last year. Is he somebody that just comes back on the cheap?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's a minimum contract guy. I mean, he's played for Sean Payton before. Payton likes him. I mean, he's a number five
Yeah.
receiver type guy. So, offer him a minimum contract and that sort of thing. Who knows? Give him a small signing bonus or something along that nature. But I don't think teams are going to be lined up for him this free agency.
And then wrapping up with the offensive line, we've already talked about a few players. So again, a lot's going to depend on free agency. Your guess is, correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe they restructure Garrett Bowles, give him maybe a contract to stay for at least 1 or 2 more years. He is getting up there in age, but you can't lose him. That would be something. But that's the thing nowadays. It's such a premium position. Everybody's looking, even if it's just for a year. Everybody's looking for a left tackle or a lineman in general. That some team with a lot of salary cap space could just overspend and say, "Hey, we'll give you 10 times what you thought you were going to get in Denver. Come play for us." So you never know how that's going to happen. And the same thing is with Cushionberry at center. You just don't know. So, do they have any besides Fleming as a cheap option? Let's talk about center too. Are there any options, or if something happens there, that's going to be a primary need for them?
Well, they like a rookie they took in the seventh round, Alex Forsythe, last year out of Oregon State, and he's a potential he's a potential guy that they like as a long term piece. He didn't play at all this past season. He was inactive for every game, but he's a potential piece. And then they got a guy, Luke Wallenberg, who they took in the draft in 2022. He was a second year guy. I don't know if he's a long term center prospect. He's more of a utility guard center type of guy. So they at least have a few, potential candidates in house. So, but they'll probably, maybe you find a stopgap veteran if you don't think either one of those guys. If they lose Cushionberry and they don't think either one of those guys is ready to step in immediately. But as you stated earlier, I mean, you can find centers late in the draft, and
Just
I
like
mean,
fourth ice, seventh round pick. Yeah.
yeah, they like him, but the key is he ready? I mean, I'm not an offensive line wizard
Sure.
to
Yeah.
start out, and I didn't spend training camp honing in on every move Mr. Forsythe made, so they know a lot more about him than I do. So we'll just have to see how it pans out.
Any other positions are set? Left guard, right tackle.
Um, yeah, we've talked. They're set at left guard with Ben Powers. They're set at right guard with Quinn Meinertz, and then right tackle with Mike McGlinchey. But Meinertz is up for an extension, and he had a top-notch season. I think he was third in the Pro Football Focus ratings at guard for the year in all of the NFL. So, he's a guy that's going to command a big extension. Do they try to get something done with that this offseason, or do they risk him becoming a free agent in March of 2025 and then he potentially walks? The guys that, and Pat Surtain is in a similar, not quite a similar situation because he's got 2 years left on his deal. They'll pick up his 5th-year option in May, but he's eligible now for an extension. So do you try to throw big money at Surtain now, or do you kind of wait until next year to potentially offer him an extension?
And you mentioned Mims as a returner. Lutz is a free agent at kicker. They definitely could be looking for a long-term answer at place kicker. What about their kicking game?
Well, they like Lutz. I mean, he had a few misses here and there. I mean, the thing is with kicking nowadays, you missed like one field goal. It's like, well, what's going on? It's crazy. He was 30 of 34, so you can't complain too much about that. He's another former Sean Payton player, and obviously they would love to have him back. Yeah, the problem would be if some other team comes in with some crazy offer,
Yeah.
then they got to make a decision. But I know Lutz loves playing for Peyton. He's had his best years with Peyton, and then after he had a dip in New Orleans after Peyton left, I mean, part of that was injury related. Basically, he resurrected his career this past year after the Saints cut him, or I should say traded him. They were ready to cut him and then traded him. But yeah, so I imagine he would take a moderate hometown discount to stay in Denver. I mean, what kicker wouldn't want to be in Denver? 60-yard field goals are like 50-yarders elsewhere,
Yeah.
although that sometimes puts more pressure on you because Lutz missed a 55-yarder in the first game and everybody was groaning like, well, what's the problem here?
Right.
So I would think, if the money is somewhat similar, even a tiny bit less, he might be willing to come back to Denver. But the risk would be if some team in desperate need of a kicker, throws out a huge contract offer.
And Dixon, how's he doing as a punter?
He was okay. Nothing great. I mean, steady. So he remains under contract. So no reason to believe that he won't be back this coming season.
All right, so taking a look once again, as always, this early in the offseason, a lot's going to depend on free agency, but it does impact Denver specifically at those spots. Center, of course, we'll keep an eye on Bowles and his contract. The whole wide receiver deal is going to be important. But first and foremost, and definitely, of course, on defense, we mentioned some of those holes that might come in to play. But first and foremost, it's like what we started at. It's going to be quarterback, and maybe can they trade down, accumulate some more draft capital, and get the right quarterback that they're looking for anyway, without being able to get those top 3 kids.
Yeah, and the money situation all starts with Russell Wilson. I mean, one assumes he's going to be released, and if they're going to have to get under the cap by the March 13th start of the league year, so they're just going to try to inch under the cap just to get there, and then sort out the Wilson situation when they have 4 or 5 days to worry about his situation, or think that there might be a Hail Mary trade or something of that nature, or are they just going to release him by then and wholesale get more than just a dollar under the cap. So that'll be interesting to see if it's a wholesale gutting at one time to get under the cap, or it's more of a gradual process, as getting under it barely and then inching more down as you sign players in free agency.
And by the way, there's no like veteran quarterbacks that have Peyton ties that are hanging around out there, as far as veterans who could play, even if they draft a rookie. Obviously, they have Stidham, but is there anyone out there, your recollection, that has ties to Peyton?
Well, Jameis Winston was with him for for a year or so there in New Orleans, and he was the supposed to be the heir apparent to Drew Brees, but of course that didn't work out. And then Teddy Bridgewater stepped in once and went 5-0.
That's
So
right.
unless they can talk him back out of retirement after he was named Miami Northwestern High School head coach,
Good for him.
maybe they'll. Well, there were some. Philip Rivers became a high school coach down in Alabama, and the rumors persisted even when he was coaching that he might be back. So if things get desperate, maybe they'll put in a call to Miami Northwestern High School next fall and ask if Bridgewater might be able to take a few games off to play quarterback for us.
Yeah, I'm sure that's not going to excite the fan base, but what will excite them is drafting a quarterback in the first round, no matter where they draft that quarterback. So I'm sure there's going to be a fun offseason, as always, when you're on the losing end of a season to find out how your team does. And management wise, from what you've seen from this group, do they seem to be in sync? GM, head coach? Yeah, as a fan, if they're watching right now, can you give them any positive remarks, analysis on these guys being able to figure this out?
Well, they say they're in concert. I mean, George Payton is the general manager, but it's generally assumed that Sean Payton has the final say in personnel matters. I even asked Payton about that at the end of the season news conference, and he said, "Oh, it's all collective effort. We've never had a disagreement." So, but I mean, everybody knows with all these Saints personnel coming in, players coming in, that Sean Payton is in charge, but George Payton remains the general manager, but he's an astute talent evaluator. I mean, I covered him back when he was with the Vikings,
Yep.
so he's the type of guy that's good to have because he certainly can help you out finding a diamond and rough or two in the draft.
Yeah, that's the big deal. And if you have someone like Sean Payton in the building, that is an asset that not many organizations have. So we'll see how it goes for a big offseason for the Denver Broncos, and if they're going to have a new quarterback in the future. Chris, I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to talk either just before or just after the draft. Unless there's something big that happens in between. And I have links in the description where they can find your work. I've seen you on interviews like this. You don't do anything on a regular basis, do you?
Not various radio appearances, but not like every Thursday at from 5 to 6 p.m. or anything like
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
I can be found at Twitter. ChrasTomasson, which is my name, and that sort of thing. And then, of course, the DenverGazette.com is our website.
Chris, appreciate it. Thanks a lot for doing this.
Hey, thanks for having me.